So I was greeted by angels, and they were the brightest colors of light that you can imagine. And they were massive. I remember thinking they were like so big in my mind in that experience.
Rose Hope, welcome to Passion Harvest. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
I'm so excited about it as well. And even the name of your podcast, I often talk about planting seeds and how we can water those seeds and how we can grow those seeds. And so it seems like a wonderful opportunity to talk about how we can harvest more in our lives today. So.
Yes, thank you and welcome. Gosh, I've got just before the show started, I have a whole list of things that I'd love to explore with you. But first, you've had two near-death experiences. Would you mind sharing that for the
Yeah.
audience, whatever you feel comfortable with?
I love talking about them, to be honest with you, because they were such profound experiences for me and they helped to shape my life as I know it to be. And so my first near death actually happened, I was only 5 years old. So I was 5 years old eating one of those round, hard candies. We called them jawbreakers over here in Canada. And so I was sucking on one of those, and my dad turns to me and he said, "Go sit down before you choke." And sure enough, I went to sit down and I took a breath in and I choked. So my dad came running over. He wrapped his arms around my waist, started doing the Heimlich maneuver, abdominal thrusts, if you will, and that object would not come out. I remember thinking in my little 5-year-old mind that my head was going to pop off. Like that was the thought that I had as I was going through that experience. And so my dad couldn't get that jawbreaker candy out. And so I went limp in his arms. And so I would completely unresponsive. I was not breathing and the pulse started to fade. And so I, in that moment, actually had what they would call an out of body experience. And so I went floating above my body. I witnessed my dad working on me below. I saw my mom running for the phone to call for help. My older sister was peeking around the corner to see what the commotion was, but I felt none of that chaos. I remember feeling as though I was held in the arms of God. That's what I remembered from that moment, that I was I was okay. I was in peace. I felt this unconditional love. And so even though I was witnessing this, very scary experience below, I didn't feel connected to that anymore. And so, thankfully, my dad did what you're actually not supposed to do. He ended up using his thumb inside, pushing against the side of my throat and prying that candy out of my throat. And so he ultimately did save my life that day. And so after that experience, I came to, and all the blood vessels in my face were broken. My whole face was black and blue, if you can imagine, from all of the pressure. But in the days to follow, that started to fade away. But Mom really noticed some changes in me. My intuition seemed to be heightened. I started to have dreams that were very lucid and very real. And in fact, I would say even nightmares after that. And I was raised in a Catholic home, which was very loving and wonderful. But, there was a bit of that taboo around what I had experienced and some of the things that were happening. So I would know things before they would happen. So I became precognitive. So I would go to my mom and I'd say, "Hey, mom, so and so died in my dream last night." And sure enough, the phone would ring and, the person had died, so these things started to happen. And I could tell it made people feel uncomfortable. And so I just kind of started stuffing that away. I just thought, oh, that's not normal. So I'll hide that away. And so as a result as well of that near death experience, I felt like I had to now prove to God that I was worthy of staying. It was like, oh, I've been given a second chance. So by the time I was in grade 4, I was the president of the Kids for Saving Earth Club. I became an overachiever, people pleaser, and that became a big part of my story. And so fast forward now into my teens, and I've decided I'm going to become an EMT and firefighter. I'm going to save lives because my dad saved mine. And so dove into health sciences and felt like that was the work, that was the passion work for me. But something else started to happen even in my young 20s now. I'm working as a paramedic, and I'm seeing these clients, these patients, and oftentimes having to deal with death. And something really profound started to happen to me. I started to bring spirits home with me. And when this first started to happen, Louisa, I thought I was going crazy. My science mind wanted to like analyze everything and figure it out. And I remember one night in particular, after having to be with a body for quite some time, I remember just feeling so EBGB by it. I had like 6 showers. I just thought, oh, I gotta get this washed off. And I really thought that there was something wrong with me because all of these gifts and all of these intuitive aspects I didn't understand. And no one had taught me about that. I had shut all of that down and stuffed it away. And so, fast forward, I'm now teaching in health sciences and I've switched careers a little bit to go into the teaching side of things because, heaven forbid I keep letting these spirits come home with me. So now I'm teaching and I love my work, but I am still struggling because I know that I have these intuitive gifts, but I don't understand them. I don't know what they are. I don't know who I am. And so I was moving through a bit of what I would call a quarter life crisis now in the middle of my 20s, feeling like, okay, I'm having some success in life, but I'm still unhappy, can't quite figure it out. So I get another near-death experience because I'm not figuring it out. And so my second near death was very different from the first. My second near death was not traumatic at all for me. I was actually recovering from knee surgery. So I had a past knee injury that I had reconstruction on. And so I was at home recovering. And they believe it was I had some sort of response to the medication that I was on. But what happened was my blood pressure tanked and I actually went completely unresponsive. So I went totally unconscious. And in the second near death experience, instead of hovering above my body as an out of body experience, I had what I can only describe as me actually being transported into what I can only describe as heaven. So I was in this beautiful orb, if you will, this energy, and I was floating in this energy. And it wasn't so physical. It was like I was just kind of floating in the ether, if you will. But I remember just feeling, again, that piece of unconditional love. So that was very similar from my first experience, where I felt that unconditional love again. But this time it was supercharged. This time I felt a euphoria I had never felt before. I felt complete and utter joy. Like I just was like giggling and crying, like both at the same time. It was just such an incredible, profound experience. And as I'm sitting in this space, I remember for a moment, I'm thinking about, oh, what about my family? And then before I knew it, that thought was gone. It was like nothing else mattered. I was completely there. And I had the thought, I'm staying here. Well, let me tell you what happened. These beautiful energies of light surrounded me. So I was greeted by angels. I know that they were angels. I have no doubt in my mind. It was so clear to me in that moment. And they were the brightest colors of light that you can imagine. So I know we depict angels in very much this human form with these wings, but they really were these orbs of light and they were massive. I remember thinking they were like so big in my mind in that experience, and they were colors more vibrant than you can even imagine, like colors of blues and yellows. And oh man, I remember thinking like I've never seen color like this before. That's how incredible it was for me. And as I communicated that I was staying there, that this was so great and I'm staying, as in many dear deaths, they said, oh no, you have work to do. You're not staying. You got stuff to finish here. And so it was very clear in my mind that I wasn't there to stay. And as soon as they said that I had work to do, that's when I came to. That was the end. And so I came out of that, Louisa, really feeling like, mm, okay, I had this experience and now people are really going to think I'm crazy. That's what I came out of there thinking. Again, you have to remember I came from this science background, overachiever, had this very professional life. And now I've had this experience with angels. Now I've had this moment that will forever change me. And I didn't know what to do with it. So in the next couple days after, I'm thinking like, oh, how do I start telling people that this happened? Like this is weird. And I decided 3 days later, I had a girlfriend come over. I was still recovering from the surgery, but I had a girlfriend come over and I'm telling her the story because I need to tell somebody. Like it's too much of a, one of those profound experiences that I can't keep inside. So I know I need to say it to somebody. So I'm telling her in my kitchen and I'm explaining this experience of the angels and the feelings that I had. And so here's the real kicker of this whole story. So my brother-in-law, he was with me when I went unconscious. So he was the one that caught me when I went unresponsive. He was there that whole process of when I went to the angels. But I hadn't told him what I experienced either. So that day, he was eavesdropping on our conversation. And I'm glad that he was because he ran into the kitchen and he slammed his hand on the counter and he said, I knew it. I felt the angels too. So he, as a bystander, also experienced something really profound. So his version of the story is that I all of a sudden went white as a ghost. I was hobbling on my crutches from the kitchen to the bed I had made in the living room. And I was on the crutches, and he said, all of a sudden you went white and you started slurring your words. And he said, I came running over and you went completely limp and I got you to the floor. And he said, I couldn't find your breathing or your pulse. So I was about to go call 911. He's like, I was in a panic because I thought you were like having a reaction to the surgery or an infection or something. And he's like, I thought that was it. And so he went to go run to call for help. And he said, as soon as he did that, he felt these energies of what he could only describe as angels. He couldn't see them. He didn't see them like I saw them. He just felt them. And they said, just wait, she's going to be fine. So then he came back to my side, knelt down beside me, and he said, within a few seconds, I opened my eyes with a smile on my face. And he said he'll never forget that moment. So for him, he also had a really incredible moving experience. And so what that did for me is it validated my experience. And doesn't that happen in life so much where like we question it in our mind and we think, oh, I better not share that with anyone, or we hold things in, even bad things, right? We're just so afraid to share them with the world. But if we did start to share them, we would realize that they are medicine for us. Our stories are medicine. And not just for us as we express them, but for a lot of times the recipients. When I first started sharing the story on professional stages, I was sure that people would just roll their eyes and think, oh, this woman's out to lunch. And as I started to share the story, more and more people would come up and say, oh, I had an experience like this too, and I've never told anybody. I've just been dying to share this, bad pun intended there, but I'm wanting to share this, this experience, right? And so that was just such a blessing. And so that's why I've begun to share the story more readily. That's why I've written about it, because I think that if we can share these stories, I think we'll really start to see that healing in the world.
Rose, thank you for sharing those two incredible, profound experiences.
Thank you.
Just a question, well, a couple of questions, but how did you how did you work through bringing deceased energies transitioned
Ah.
home with you? What did you do?
Oh, I'm so glad that you asked that because, well, at first I just wanted to push it away. I thought this is too weird for me. This is too scary. I had watched enough unsolved mysteries when I was a young kid. So, so I'd created this real story, this real fear around energies and spirits and ghosts, if you will, right? And so, I didn't understand it. And so I had shoved that away. And so once I had my second near-death experience, it took some time for me to learn some of the things that I know now, but I did start to research because I was like, okay, I needed to understand it for myself, right? And so what I've understood now is that a lot of times these energies, these spirits, if you will, that are showing up in some way, whether we call them ghosts or poltergeists or what have you, they're really there to get attention. They just want to be seen and heard, just like everybody else. Don't we all want to be seen and heard on some level? And so these energies sometimes they just get caught here, they get earthbound here. And so the theory or the belief is that these energies, these spirits, simply just need love and care. And so I've learned now that those spirits, most of them are just needing someone to say, I see you, I hear you, all is forgiven, to give them some compassion, right? And most of the time, those spirits are good to go. You know, we give them some love, we give them some attention, and then they are set free, if you will. And not any energy that comes through or spirit that comes through is necessarily there to be set free. But many of them, if they are, causing a ruckus in anyone's home or anything like that. But oftentimes, loved ones just want to come and say hi. You know, their spirits are there to just nurture a relationship for our own healing and our own growth. You know, I have people that I've lost in my life that still come to visit me in a very loving way, and they show me signs, and they guide me, and they become allies for me. And so again, we have a choice whether or not we want to lean into that. For a long time, I pushed it away because I didn't understand it and it was uncomfortable for me, especially with a very analytical, logical science mind.
Mm.
Okay, is this real? Am I just making stuff up? And so now I've come to understand it in a different way. And so to hold space, honor, and respect those energies. And again, many of them are to help us and to guide us along the way, and some just need an extra little bit of love and compassion, and they're on their way as well. So, that's a whole another topic of mediumship and that connection. And many of us have that ability. And I'm sure even our audience listening, some people might have stories of loved ones that have visited them through a dream or through a sign. Feathers, dimes, coins, oftentimes, sometimes stones, sometimes even through music, loved ones communicate. So there's lots of different ways that they'll connect with us and support us and pour their love into us.
Well, you just answered my next question. If someone, how can someone connect with their loved ones? And you've just answered that question. So thank you. You're
I
making
mean,
my job easy.
that's so wonderful. I mean, I think, at the end of the day, it's like if you want to connect with a loved one, you can utilize somebody like me who specializes in that, but you can do it yourself too. And this is one of the biggest messages I share with people is that, the gifts of intuition that I use, we all have. We all have the ability to be connected intuitively. We now understand through science that everything is vibration. And so that we can start to read into vibration, and we can sense vibration, and we can understand and interpret vibration. And all of us have the ability to do that. It's just a matter of whether or not we're willing to lean into that or believe it to be true. If I don't believe it to be true, right, it's harder for me to connect. If I believe it to be true and then I come to know it to be true, well, now I've really opened up the floodgates for me to be able to have these experiences of connection. And so, one of the things that one can do to really open up to a past loved one, if they're open, is they can simply set intention and say, I'm open to receiving any messages or any love or any connection or any healing that needs to take place between me and so and so. So if we just open up that connection, oftentimes we'll then notice that either we'll have a dream with that person, or maybe we'll hear that person's voice in our mind. Sometimes we'll just have a feeling that they're there. Sometimes they'll be a little bit more obvious and they'll give us a certain symbol. Some people have certain birds or animals that they communicate through. Sometimes they have, again, like I said, music or feathers or coins, or maybe there's a smell even that reminds you of somebody. So our loved ones can show us that they're there in a lot of different ways. Our role in that is just to be open and don't worry about, making sense of it. Just receive it. I'm not going to, try and figure out why the dime showed up on the ground at that time. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I felt some sort of sense of that person or connection with them. So openly receive that and know that that's their way of extending love to you, guiding you, supporting you.
Thank you. Just one more question about what you last spoke about when you were 5 and you had your near-death experience, your intuition with future premonitions. Has that
Yeah.
continued?
It has. And in fact, it's gotten stronger now. So, through my younger years, I stuffed that away. And really, it wasn't only until my late 30s when I really started diving in even more deeply into the Akashic Records. And so, to continue my journey, after that second near death, a lot of people are like, oh, then you had life figured out. And no, I did not. It still took me a while because with that second near death, I just wanted heaven. I wanted to go back to that heavenly space. I craved it, Louisa. So what did I do? I started looking everywhere I could, high and low, out here for what that heaven looked like. I thought, okay, when I have babies, that'll be heavenly. When I find the love of my life, that'll be like heaven. When I have the success in my business, then that'll be heaven. So I created this I'll be happy when game. Do you know that game? The losing game of I'll be happy when, right? I'll be happy when I get to this place. I'll be happy when. And so I actually hit a really big depression after my second near death because I wanted to find heaven again so badly. And I searched high and low and I couldn't find it. And I felt like a failure. I thought, okay, I've done all the right things, quote unquote, that I'm supposed to do to have a happy life. And here I am with this beautiful life, and yet I'm still not happy. And so I got stuck in that place. And in fact, I was in deep postpartum depression after my second child. And I came to a fork in the road because I had decided that I was in such despair and I had failed and I'd been given these two near deaths and I still was failing at life. And I really felt, even though again, on the surface, it all looked great, everyone, I had the millionaire life, $1 million family with a child, a son and a daughter. I had everything everyone could imagine, and yet I was struggling. So I felt a great deal of guilt and shame because I thought, come on, I have it good. Like, what's wrong with me? So I thought there was something really wrong with me. And of course, coupled with that postpartum depression, I really felt like it would be better if I exited this plane. I had decided I was going to take my life, actually. And so I got to that point and I got to my, basically my hands and knees. I was going to bed one night and debating how I was going to take my life and feeling all sorts of desperation and exhaustion. And I prayed and I said, okay, God, I said, this is the only path I see is making sense. I just want to go back to this heavenly place. Show me. If there's another path, show me. So I asked for another path and I was given one. And so in that moment, I was shown this incredible vision, Louisa, and it was to create a holistic healthcare system. And so I had this vision of what I was to create. But again, it was still very much outside of myself. So then I started building this business. It got me distracted for a while. But then I was still finding myself getting into old people pleasing, overachieving habits, still self-sacrificing, still pushing and pushing and pushing, trying so hard in life. And it didn't switch until I was introduced to the Akashic Records. And so I met someone who did the Akashic Records, and I thought, well, what do you mean you can read other people's souls library? What do you mean I can access this information? Like, what is this all about? And so I went in as a skeptic, to be honest, again, having my scientific background, I went in thinking, this stuff is hocus pocus. And I went in, and that's when the floodgates opened because I realized that there was so much more that we are missing here. There is so much inside of us. We have forgotten who we are. We have forgotten to be connected with all that we are. And so I was so disconnected from myself and my spirit. I had been playing this game of, again, I'll be happy when, and looking everywhere outside of myself, but not going inside. And now I
We
just
often do
laugh,
that, yes.
right? And now I think it's so obvious, of course that's the answer. Of course that's the answer. And I had been told many times that was the answer before, but it never made sense to me. It never landed for me. I wasn't ready. And so until I was ready, I wasn't going to look in there. And so it was this beautiful journey then in which I went completely inward. And that was where heaven was. Little did I know that everything that I had been seeking outside of myself was actually in there the whole time. And I remember reading the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And I love that story because it is so poignant in the fact that we go out on these adventures searching and seeking and seeking and seeking when really the treasure has always been right under our nose. And so it was this beautiful moment for me where I was just like, oh, it's been here the whole time. everything I needed was here the whole time. And it's okay that I wasn't looking there before because I needed to go through those experiences. And so I had to extend grace to myself for not getting it sooner, you know? But it was a beautiful path of discovery. And so now I walk in that path with my soul always, every day. There is spirit that is intertwined and interwoven into my day. And so it's not separate for me to be spiritual. It is, I am spiritual. I am having a spiritual life. And so allowing that to become present in my day to day has been one of the most profound shifts for me.
Thank you. So having an Akashic record reading, I think most of the audience may be familiar with what the Akashic records are. How does that, what does it entail? What's revealed? I know it's different for everyone, and how does it help us move on our life path?
So here's the beauty of the Akashic records. Again, anyone can access the records, and many people are accessing them and not knowing that through their own prayer or through their own meditation. So the theory behind the Akashic records is that we can access everything that is, was, and ever shall be. And so there's an imprint energetically of everything. And so it's kind of like if we can imagine that we're like recording this session, right? It's like there's a record of all of that. It's being all recorded. And so the idea is that we can go into this space of consciousness. So the Akashic Records is said to be a space of consciousness that we can access, of high vibrational consciousness. And the word Akashics, it's actually pronounced Akasha is the pronunciation of it, and it's Sanskrit for primordial substance or beginning of time. So that means from the time that I left source or God or creator, whatever your definition of that is that I now have access to all of those records. And so it's a really sacred space that we enter into. I use a prayer to access people's records. And you can open the records of just about anything. I could open the records of a business, of a podcast. I can open the records of a location, a monument, a home. I can open the records of animals. So it's a beautiful way to explore. And what happens inside of the space of the Akashic records is that we're using our intuition, but everything is amplified in that frequency. So because we're going into a deeper level of consciousness, we also get this access to amplify everything. So people can also do healing work inside of the Akashics where they're doing like Reiki, or maybe they're doing some sort of energy surgery in there. For some people, they just want to get information. So we could bring a whole list of questions that we could ask. And so this is actually one of the ways in which, back to your question of like those psychic abilities or precognition, the Akashic records amplified that gift for me. So once I started going into the Akashic records, I could see future pathways for people. Now, I want to remind everyone too, not to get attached to any future pathways because they are pathways of possibility. And there's so many factors that go into those manifesting. But we can tell you specific pathways that are highest for your life, highest value, highest possible vibration frequency for you. So I don't get too much into a lot of strong predicting because I really believe at the end of the day, we have the power of our own free will. And I think that's really important for people. If you're hiring any readers or psychics, to really keep your personal power intact. I have heard of other people. I actually had a client who had invested tens of thousands with a psychic, and the psychic was telling the client that if she didn't continue to pay her for services, that she would never find the love of her life. And that was so heartbreaking to hear. And so just reminding people that they keep their personal power. Like no other person can decide that for you. Do not give all your money away. Trust in your own knowing, your own intuition. And this is part of my mission is to teach people how they can do this for themselves so that they're not relying on somebody else to necessarily tell them that they can just learn to trust in their own innate knowing because we all have these beautiful gifts and abilities. And I recognize that it is helpful to have somebody outside of us. You know, it's like I can't read my palm, it's too close to me, right? If it's like right in my face. So it helps us to have other people. But I just want to remind people that they have the power of their own free will. Do not give your power away to any reader or psychic or anything like that. That we are meant to be here as guides to show you the power and the potential that you have within you.
So that means the future's not set in stone. There are infinite probabilities.
Absolutely. There's so many pathways of possibility, but there are some that are more suited for you that are going to bring you to your result faster, or there are some that are going to teach you some different type of lessons along the way if you need them. So some might say that there's like a bit of a blueprint. So I like to see it as a bit of a blueprint, but then I can make changes to, okay, if we think of it as a foundation to a house, and I've got this house blueprint, and right now the stairs are over here, but like as I'm going on the journey, I'm like, oh, you know what? There's still stairs in the house, but the stairs, instead of being over here, they're going to be over here. So we can make adjustments as we evolve and as we grow, which therefore is shifting some of the potential pathways that we can embark on. So yes, in some ways there are certain things that are going to happen for our evolution no matter what, depending on what our soul needs. And sometimes that's conscious, sometimes that's not. And then there are certain things that we can do that really can redirect certain pathways of possibility.
Thank you. Rose, where's the best place for people to find you or connect with you?
Oh my goodness. Well, I do enjoy Instagram. So Rose Hope Soul on Instagram, you can certainly find me there. I do have a little podcast and I love to share valuable insights to really help us and guide us to know that, there's so much within us that we can access and use to our advantage in terms of creating our lives. We are co-creators, aren't we, after all? And so we have this wonderful opportunity to really participate in this unraveling of our world and of our lives. And so I'd love to speak about that through my podcast on When Spirit Calls, and I have guests on there all the time. So you can certainly explore that as an option. And you're the one that reminded me of my book, The Art.
Yes, I can see it behind
So
you.
yeah, so this book, The Arc, I was telling you earlier, this was a 20-year project, and it really is, again, and I think part of my message today needs to be around the storytelling, right? And sharing our stories. I have so many stories that unlocked so much for me, and I love sharing them because it unlocks things for other people. And so the story that I wrote in The Arc was much around my near-death experiences. However, different types of near-death experiences. I wanted to change it. I didn't want it to be my story. I wanted it to be a story of the world. And it is a book of remembrance. So as people read the book, the idea is that they're going to start remembering, like, oh, wait a second. I am a little clairvoyant. I can see things, or I have had dreams, or maybe they'll feel something inside of them and they'll say, oh yeah, I noticed that gut feeling and I knew I should have gone to the other place, there's all these times that we forget where our intuition has either spoken to us and we've listened and regret, or haven't listened and regretted it, or we've listened and been like, yes, I'm so glad I listened to my intuition, right? And so this book is meant to invoke some of that remembrance, but also take people into a very heavenly space where the character learns some really valuable lessons for life. So there's also some spiritual lessons within the book. And I mentioned The Alchemist because that was one of my inspirations for this book too. I wanted to tell a story that had some messages and meaning in it that people could really take away from reading.
Well, congratulations. I'm so proud of anyone that writes a book. Congratulations. I've got two more questions for you,
Yes,
if that's
please.
okay.
Of course, I have all the time for you.
Number one, intuition. How can we tap more into our intuition and guidance and an inner knowing?
I love this question so much because I think, a lot of people will say, well, I don't have that. I don't have it. And we all have it. That's the first thing, to know that we all have this. It's one of our inner technologies, and inner technology are the gifts that we've been given by divine or creator, source, whatever you want to call that. And so we have this incredible inner technology. And so the inner technology technology consists of these intuitive gifts. And so the first one is to know that you've got them. Okay. The second one is to set intention. I'm open to receiving whatever insight that I need. So you start opening that up. You just say, I'm willing, I'm open. So opening yourself up to that. The next step is to actually build a relationship to those gifts. So what I mean by this is that, again, when I have a gut feeling about something, I can listen or not, but I want to invite people to start kind of tuning in and saying, oh, okay, I had this gut feeling like maybe I shouldn't go to this event this weekend. Okay, what is that gut feeling really about? So I'm going to sit with that gut feeling. I maybe write, even get a pen and some paper out, and I might write some notes, and I'll say, okay, gut feeling, what do I need to know about this? Is this coming in from, a past experience? Is this something that, I need to avoid this weekend completely, or can I just modify my plans? Like, you can start asking questions. And I know some people will say, well, it's weird to talk to myself. Well, just practice and play with it, because I'm telling you, you're a multidimensional being. There's many aspects to you. And so I actually tell people it's very normal to talk to yourself. And in fact, it's really healthy to do so. And so this opportunity to lean into that, when I've had a dream, I wake up and I say, okay, oh, is there anything I need to do with this dream? Do I need to just sit with it for a moment? Is there any lesson in the dream for me? So I start to build those relationships with these gifts. If I hear something in my mind, I might say, okay, tell me more. So again, depending on how it's showing up for you, just open up some conversation, ask some more questions, invoke childlike awe and wonder. I wonder what this gut feeling is about. I wonder what this message in my mind is all about. And so as you start to do that, what happens is those gifts say, oh my gosh, they're listening to me. They see me, they hear me. Those gifts get excited in themselves, and they open up this channel of possibility. So then those gifts will start giving you more and more and more. And so you start to build these beautiful relationships within yourself with different aspects of yourself. And that is one of the best ways that you can deepen your relationship with your intuition. So awareness, intention, and relationship. That's it, right? It's actually that simple. Okay, I'm aware
It's
I have these,
simple and beautiful.
right? Yeah. I'm aware I have these gifts. I'm now going to set an intention that I'm going to be open to receiving these gifts. I'm going to be open to relationship. And then I'm going to build the relationship through asking questions, invoking that awe and that wonder, and having some curiosity about what's showing up. And if you need help in thinking that you are intuitive, because you're like, I'm not intuitive, no, think back to the times when you thought of a friend and then the phone rang and it was them. Or think back to a moment when you thought of a person and then you ran into them. Think about those moments where you're like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have gone that way, and it saved me from an accident, right? Like, there's all of these pieces of evidence that we can even pull to help us, to reinforce that, to remind us. These are gifts we're all given. Whether or not you want to build a relationship, totally up to you. But I will tell you that if you're willing to lean in, using your intuition, which we actually in metaphysics call the God mind or the true self, the higher self, that's really that's our God muscle. That's our God connection, where divine is actually guiding us and showing us the way. And so we can avoid a lot of conundrums and difficulties and suffering if we're willing to lean in and build those relationships. It will expedite your ability to manifest. It will help you to avoid difficult situations that you don't really need to go through. It will help you to create experiences that guide you to highest of highs, to this evolution, if you will, that you're on. And I feel like I need to share this really quick too, because a lot of people have said, well, no, my intuition guided me to this person and then it blew up in my face and then it wasn't good. So my intuition was wrong. And I want to share with people that true intuition is never wrong. Our perception of the outcome is. So we have this perception that if my intuition's guiding me somewhere, that it's all going to be like rainbows and butterflies. But sometimes our intuition guides us into difficult experiences as well, because we need to learn something there, because there's something in there for our growth and our understanding. And so just to remind people of that, that the intuition's always right. It's our perception or how we respond to the outcome that oftentimes maybe isn't. Because I tell you, my intuition has guided me to certain people that I just loved, and then it like something happened, and then it got distorted, and it just turned into something I didn't expect. But it was because I needed to go through that learning or that opportunity or that experience. So it's about trying to step back from judgment about the outcome, but just trust in knowing that you are being guided along the right path, that those spiritual breadcrumbs are showing up for you for a reason.
I love how you said that. I've often had people say to me, or me as well, I thought I was tapped in and tuned in and listening to my intuition, and it didn't work out as planned. But
Right? Yes. And sometimes it's because in our mind of what we think the plan's supposed to look like
like
is
it has to
actually,
work out like this.
uh-huh, exactly. In mysticism, we call it continual expectancy because in human beings, we get so attached to it, these certain outcomes of it needing to look a certain way, and then we suffer when it's not the way that we think it's supposed to show up. But with continual expectancy, I'm expecting that whatever the outcome is exactly what is needed for my highest good. So even if my perception of the outcome is like, that was crap, I know that it was there for my highest good. And so then what happens when we do that, when we have that perspective, Louisa, is then we open up for this opportunity of receiving the value in it. So we get so much more out of life if we're willing to look at it from that perspective that, oh, this is not the way I thought it was supposed to turn out, but I know that there's something in here of value for me. So what is that? And start squeezing it for all that it's worth. So then we get to leverage that. Then we get to receive the value in it. And it's shifted the whole experience now because rather than me being in a pity party or feeling sorry for myself that it didn't work out the way I thought it was supposed to, instead, I can say, ooh, there's something really good and potent in this lesson of maybe me making decisions too fast, or maybe I've learned, to follow my intuition more, or to, whatever that might be. There's always something in it of value for us. And if we can do that in life, then we come into this place where we're actually always winning. And we're actually always finding the joy in all of the experiences because now I'm getting the lessons, I'm getting the value.
And gosh, it can alleviate so much suffering.
Oh, so much suffering. I suffered a lot in my life because things didn't work out the way I thought they were
Me
supposed
too.
to. Right? And I'm like, why? I'm trying so hard. Why isn't it working? Instead of saying, what's in it for me?
Mm,
Oh, this kind of sucks. This is uncomfortable for me, but what's in it for me?
yeah.
Because then I'm more conscious about that choice of suffering instead of, just being so disappointed and so brokenhearted that it didn't turn out the way I thought it should, and actually just allowing it to be what it is, right? There's a beautiful book by Byron Katie called Loving What Is. And it's such a profound book because it really moves us into that place of like, oh, okay, wait a second. Even though this is showing up differently than what I hoped, there's still something in it for me, and perhaps something even more potent than had it shown up with ease.
Mm. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. And I haven't read that book, but I'm going to look it up. I guess
Oh,
this
well.
kind of segues into my final question is you speak a lot about mastering your mind.
Ah,
I'm going to
yes,
pass it over to you. It's such a massive topic.
it
Whatever you
is.
want to say.
Okay, okay. I'm going to share with you what is coming to the top of my mind right now because I know that spirit guides me always in this. So, in metaphysics, we look at the mind in a couple components, again, reminding us that we're multidimensional. And so we've got our ego mind. This is our logical mind, okay? Some will even say that EGO and ego stands for Earth Generated Operating System, right? So we've got this ego, and this ego is there thousands of years ago in the cave people days. That ego said, run from the bear, run from the fire. It was there to keep us alive. But over thousands of years, the ego mind or the logical mind, it hijacks us. So it steps in and it tells us, oh, like, oh, you can't do a podcast. You don't know what you're talking about. Or it says, oh, you can't quit the job and do the thing that you love. Or it says, whatever. It's saying all these things to you because it wants to keep you safe. And I want to give you guys an example of how powerful the ego mind is because what happens is the ego mind tells us a story and then we listen to it. But the ego mind isn't always truth. Okay. In fact, again, in metaphysics, we call it the false self. because it's really good at taking these little snippets of stories and then building up some elaborate story. It's a really good, storyteller, but some of the stories we get hooked into can really take us away from the quality of our lives. And let me give you an example. Okay, I was on a home stretch of a degree I took in my 20s. And I was so eager to be done this degree. I was on the final exam of my final class to finish. I'm on the home stretch, okay? I'm almost done. I'm so excited to be done. And I go to write my final exam, and my ego comes in and it says, hey, well, you failed an exam in the last class. You had to do a rewrite, so you're probably going to fail this one too. So I'm writing this test, and this ego is coming in and it keeps chattering, and it's like, you're failing. You don't know the answers. You're just making stuff up. You don't know what you're talking about. By the time I was done the exam, I was certain I failed that test. Like I had no doubt in my mind I failed. In fact, so much so, I bawled the whole way home. I got home, I emailed my professor and I said, I know I failed the exam. Please tell me what I need to focus on for the rewrite because I just want to get it done. I'm already ready to preparing myself for the rewrite because I know I failed. And so my professor was so quick and so awesome to write me a message right back. And she said, I don't know whose test you think you wrote, but you got 87%. So I got 87% on a test that my ego had convinced me I had failed. And I want to invite everyone to think about a time when maybe their ego made up a story that wasn't true. Like maybe you had made up this story that when you had to go sit down with your boss that they were going to fire you, and then that actually didn't happen. Or maybe it was like whatever it was that your ego hooked into a story and you believed it. And then realized later that, oh my gosh, that was so off of what I had made up in my mind. And so our ego does this. And kudos to the ego for being so creative, but the ego doesn't know its place. We haven't set boundaries. And so what happens is the ego wants to hijack us. It wants to hold us hostage until you put the boundaries in place. So the first thing I suggest to people is if you want to master your mind, you've got to befriend your ego. And so making friends with your ego, this is not to say the ego's all bad. The ego still keeps us alive and keeps us very much functioning in this human world, right? We need it, right? But the ego doesn't know its boundaries unless we give it some. And so if we can start setting boundaries with that ego, then when the ego comes in and it's negative and it's telling you stories and say, thank you so much. I know you're trying to protect me, but I've got this. Or you might say, okay, ego, thank you so much for bringing that to the surface. But what is this really about? Right? And start questioning it. Because if we do that, the ego is going to say, oh, okay, wait a second. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Maybe I'm stepping in and I shouldn't be. Eventually the ego will get quieter and quieter. And people will say, well, how do you know it's the ego? Well, oftentimes the ego is going to be the one that's negative, right? It's going to be telling you all sorts of stories about what you can't do and what's going to be difficult and all the stories like that, right? The one thing that I really appreciate and has helped me a lot with my ego is I've given it a name. And so that's one of the greatest tips I can give the audience is give your ego a name. And I know that might sound silly at first, but play with that because once you can start to separate yourself from your own ego, and that's the challenge for most people, right? They feel like they are their ego, they can't separate. But if you start to create a name for it, you can start to see inside of yourself that separation. My client the other day, I think this is so fun. She called hers Ivana Gripe a lot. Ivana Gripe a lot is the name of her ego. So,
That's great.
have some fun with it, but separate yourself from it because if you can do that, that ego is going to get quieter, your confidence will grow, and not only that, but now you're going to build a relationship. It's going to open up the floodgates for that relationship with your higher mind. Okay. And in metaphysics, we call this the true self. This is the God mind, the higher self. We have lots of different ways to reference it. I like to call it the divine mind. And so once I get that ego stepping aside, because the ego hijacks and blocks that relationship oftentimes. That's why we get blocked on our intuition. That's why we get so confused because we're like, the ego's like, oh no, you can't do that. And the intuition says, please follow this trail, and we kind of get stuck in there. But again, if we give names and we can separate ourselves within ourselves, right? And again, understanding it's all collective consciousness at the end of the day, but to break it down for us, it helps us to then have so much more power So this gives us personal power. Because when we have personal power, we don't have the need to have power and control out here anymore because we have it all built in. And so then we start to build these relationships. Okay, I've got my higher mind, I've got my ego self. Great. Now I'm having these conversations. Now I'm letting everyone be seen. I get to be the mediator. I get to be the one that says, okay, I'm going to choose to listen to my higher mind today. I'm going to choose to let that be the thing that leads me forward. Right. And so those relationships, this is how we start to master the mind. This is how we begin to access the divine information, the divine downloads, if you will, that can help us to stay on our most divine path. So we're not getting distracted and lost in this world that we live in. Yeah.
Thank you. And I love the tip about giving it a name. It's I've already got a funny one I'm thinking of. Thank you
Hey,
so
oh,
much.
fun. Okay, good. That's so fun. I love it. Love it. Love it.
Rose Hope, I've loved having you on Passion Harvest. Is there anything else you would like to share with the Passion Harvest audience that I haven't asked you on a final note?
A reminder that anything is possible. And when you open yourself up to believing that, then what happens? Anything. So that is the invitation. And when we can lean into that, when we understand that, then we know that in every given moment, we have everything we need and then some. Because we do.
Lovely.
There we go. That's it.
Rose, thank you so much for being on Passion Harvest.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. I've loved every minute. Thank you, Louisa.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.